All right, gentlemen, Scott here. If you're listening right as this episode is released, this month's Masterclass for Men is happening this coming Wednesday, the 25th of June at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's GMT-4 for those of you overseas. The topic? How to handle competition from other men. That pretty much speaks for itself. We as men are born competitors, whether we like it or not. If you aren't getting what you want in life, it's inevitable that someone else got it instead. There's no starker reality than how this relates to women. The woman you desire is desired by other men in particular. To get her, other men who want her will have to go without. Does this mean you put her on a pedestal? Well, quite the opposite. That and all the other secrets that men in this postmodern era either can't or won't understand are yours for the taking this coming Wednesday night. Now, 2 months ago, we talked about winning. That was a popular masterclass, and there have been numerous requests to go deeper specifically into how to maximize and capitalize on those situations where other men covet what you want or what you already have. That's a whole new twist and an important one. Get this right, and you'll write your own ticket with women, in your career, in life. Now, fair warning, this will not be a Mr. Nice Guy masterclass. By necessity, because of the subject matter at hand, the gloves are coming off for this one. It will be raw, and you'll have to be able to handle the truth. But the reward is nothing short of checking off your goals and getting what you want, which makes you a hero in the eyes of those who truly love you. Are you ready? Take a deep breath and grab your ticket at mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass. And now, here comes one of those episodes that touches upon futurism, which I know you guys love. My first-time guest is the very smart author, Ayush Prakash. Let's do this.
Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
All right, how's it going, gentlemen? This is your main man, Scott McKay, coming at you with another episode of the Mountaintop Podcast from X and Y Communications. You can find me at Scott McKay on X, on YouTube, on TikTok, and on Truth Social. And you can find me at Real Scott McKay on Instagram. Today, I have on this show for you guys a brand new friend of mine who has a wonderful topic. We're going to talk about the effect of artificial intelligence and really all sorts of digital technology on men nowadays, especially young men. But you guys who were kind of dinosaurs like me out there, well, we're close to it, or won't admit it, or all of the above. Don't tune out this show because I think it'll apply to you in many wonderful, great ways as well. His name is Ayush Prakash. He is from Montreal, Canada, and he is the author of At AI for Gen Z. And it's an interesting book, and you're going to get some, well, unique and different insights that I'm not sure you've talked about or heard about yet. So without anything further, Ayush Prakash, welcome, man.
Scott, it's great to be here. You know, it's great to talk about these things to the people that are being affected by them the most. So I'm ready to answer all of your questions. Let's do it.
Now, you are a Gen Zer, correct?
Yes, I'm Gen Z. I'm 24. I was born in 2001.
And we were chit-chatting pre-roll before we hit record on this podcast, and you're kind of cynical about the wisdom your generation is already showing or not showing. Why don't you talk a little bit about that in general before we dive into specifically how technology has affected everybody in general, really, but especially your milieu of folks out there? Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. The cynicism basically stems from the fact that Gen Z, to me, are in such a precarious situation. And yet, number one, I don't think they fully realize it. But number two, subsequently, because they don't realize it, we're not doing much to try to change that. And so when I see Gen Z as influencers, you know, on TikTok, doing the TikTok dances or whatever, you know, they have so many ideas about politics and climate change and this and that. Like, sure, it's fine to have these opinions. Every generation has opinions, and that's fine. But if you guys really are the digital natives, if you guys really do wield technology in very different ways, why are we not using it in very different ways? Why are we not using it to build out a different future? Whenever I talk to young people, it's a bunch of complaints about the future. It's a bunch of, hey, the baby boomers or Gen X or, pick a generation. They've screwed, this particular thing up. And my reaction, my retort always is, well, what are you doing to change that? Are you building a business? Or are you, creating an intergenerational group to try to solve that, to create a framework to solve that? And the answer always falls flat on its head. And so I don't want my cynicism to reflect my, let's say, non-belief that my generation can do something, but my cynicism kind of stems from the fact that every single Gen Z that I've talked to has never put forth an idea or a plan to change the future, but they're very quick to complain about it.
Well, everything I've seen would point to total agreement with what you're talking about. I will add this as a caveat. I believe just about every generation that has ever existed, certainly in the modern age and into the postmodern age, has believed in this massive generation gap between themselves and their parents and perhaps their grandparents. Here in the United States, we had the greatest generation ever, in quotes, air quotes, during World War II. And those people got after it and defeated the Nazis and the Japanese and saved the world for democracy. And I don't think anybody really has any complaint about them. But since then, the hippies in the 60s and the punk rockers in the 80s and conspicuous consumption, this, that, and the other, between the boomers and the Gen Xers, all of that's taken a lot of criticism. And even as a kid, we thought our parents were stupid. We thought our parents' music was stupid. They weren't in touch with anything modern. And then in the internet age, which can you believe was 30 years ago when we first started really getting on the internet, the first commercials with http://Toyota.com were about 1995-ish, right? We've had 30 years of the internet age, so many of the kids nowadays, including my own kids, have very internet savvy parents, and yet they still think their parents are stupid too. Every generation has its way of shocking their parents. In the 50s, all it took was rock and roll. In the 60s, it was drugs. And, most recently, kids go and get tattoos to basically shock their parents or become another gender to shock their parents, often with their parents' full consent. It's a weird time to be alive, yes. But I think this generational divide and the young people thinking the old people are foolish and the old people looking back at the young people going, God, by the time you're my age, you're going to have a whole lot more wisdom under your belt and you're going to realize how foolish you look. I'm not sure that's anything new at all. What in your mind, Ayush, differentiates the Gen Z dilemma here? I guess what sets it apart compared to the rebellion or the mindset of previous generations who all in succession thought their predecessors were idiots?
Scott, it's a great question. And you're absolutely right. When you look back in the 20th century, there were many counterculture movements, let's say, that were the defining eras of those decades. You had the hippies in the 60s, the punk rock in the 80s, as you're saying. But the difference is that people using psychedelics or people turning to punk rock was not this, let's say, incredible abyss of information. When you use technology, when Gen Z are born in, let's say the generation starts 1997 and ends in 2012, when they're born in the 2000s, they are born next to, a piece of technology. Post 2010, they're probably born next to an iPad or an iPhone or a MacBook. I got my first MacBook when I was 10. That's not a brag, but that's just like how ingrained technology was into my childhood. And so to answer your question, the difference is that they have technology, they grew up with technology, and as I make the case in my book, they grew up with technology to the point where their brains neuroplastically morphed around technology to the point where it's become like an extension of themselves, which I can get into later. But when I look at Gen Z and their complaints, they're complaining on technology. And I find that incredibly ironic because that same technology can be used to at least solve the problem. Like, for example, I can use my iPhone to post on X or Twitter, X formerly Twitter, about, the climate crisis, right? There are ocean dead zones, there's ocean acidification, there's, all of these things, antibiotic resistance, there's That's not climate change, but there's the insect apocalypse. All of these things, right? And these are, well and true, and there's studies. But at the same time, why am I not creating like a cross-generational group? Why am I not using my phone to contact, professors across the world on, hey, what's the latest research? Maybe I can start a company. Maybe I can intern for them and contribute in that way. Why am I not using my complaints and my anger about the state of the world to enact some difference in the world? That's where my, frustration with my generation comes from, because they have so much power in their hands. Every business is catering to Gen Z now. I mean, you look at, people on TikTok and businesses on TikTok, it's the most cringy stuff that they're being forced to dance, right? And it just shows it's a pure and explicit showcase of like, hey, this is where Gen Z are, this is what they like, and so you're forced to do it if you want your business to survive in that way. So if you have that power, why are you not using that for the greater good of humanity, which you're already complaining about that's being lost? That to me feels incredibly paradoxical.
Well, you bring up several good points there, the first of which is highlighting the neuroplasticity of youngins out there. I do absolutely acknowledge with my whole heart that when you're, say, 7 and under, you can just absorb knowledge like a sponge. Kids can learn languages much more quickly than old farts can. My son was fully able to operate a smartphone in just about every way you can imagine, in some ways better than his parents when he was 3 years old. It was like he was born with it. Wow. That's remarkable and in some ways horrifying. My son's now 17. He's fixing to be an adult here, as we say in Texas. And now upon us, in addition to everything that you've talked about as being potentially a blight upon this generation, the latest generation is going to know nothing other than an AI-generated universe.
Oh, yeah.
You have the ability to make fire, you have the wheel, you have the airplane, you have television, you have the internet, the smartphone. Now you have AI. It's that big a deal. Ayush, we've elected 2 presidents who are about 80 years old in rapid succession in this country, which makes no sense because anyone over 40 can't get a job. And as these guys know, I do career coaching as well as dating and relationship coaching. And this is something practically everybody I'm talking to is bemoaning. It's like, man, I'm obsolete even though I'm 44 years old, right? And every single job out there demands you be an expert on AI. The joke is every job wants you to have 10 years of experience with large language models, or you can't apply. Which is actually a 30-year-old joke, because 30 years ago, everybody wanted a webmaster with 10 years experience, right?
Right.
It just doesn't exist. The name of your book has AI in it. So obviously you have some very strong and extensive feelings about how AI is already affecting society in general, and especially Gen Zers. Tell us about that. What inspired the book, and what's the book about?
Yeah, so the book, I guess the quick history of the book is that I was forced into COVID university. I got 1 semester of actual university experience, and then I was forced into what's called Zoom University, where I paid full tuition for a Zoom class. But I really wanted to get a minor in AI and a major in philosophy, but the minor got disrupted with COVID, and so I just read everything that I could get my hands on in regards to AI. And as I was reading all those books and listening to all the podcasts and reading all the articles, the big glaring omission was the fact that nobody was talking about this material in relation to my generation. So you can talk about at length automation or autonomous weapons or deep fakes or virtual politicians, but nobody was talking about it in a way that makes it accessible to my generation, so that if you're talking about low skill, low wage jobs are going to be automated first, and then Gen Z are coming in for the low wage, low skill jobs, nobody had connected the dots in a very explicit manner to say Gen Z are going to be at a worse place off as soon as they enter the job market, or they're not going to be even able to enter the job market because of artificial intelligence. And so that's kind of where the book sprouted from. That's the crux of the book, is explaining the state of artificial intelligence and what's happening to Gen Z. That's one pillar of the book. Another pillar is just explaining the state of Gen Z. What is a Gen Z? Who are a Gen Z? What are they like? What does quiet quitting mean for the generation? Why do they care so much about climate change? What is their mental health like? Why are they what happened during COVID. The latter part of the book, part 3, is about explaining the neuroplasticity of the generation. So your point to this new generation, Gen Alpha, being the AI generated generation or being susceptible to AI generated stuff is absolutely brilliant, and I want to get to that, but I'll stick with Gen Z first. So part 3 basically talks about these 3 R's that I came up with. It's called reward, reputation, and reach. So reward is pretty simple. We're all familiar now because of contemporary science with the dopaminergic system. We all have a dopamine system in our brain. I shouldn't oversimplify it, but I encourage people to read books like Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke to get a really core understanding, or search up Andrew Huberman's podcast to get a really core understanding. But dopamine is a neurotransmitter in your brain, and it responds to reward. So if you're eating a cookie, your dopamine goes up, and as soon as you stop eating cookie, dopamine goes down and you get pain. And so as you get the pain, you reach for another cookie to get the dopamine to go up. Social media preys on that. So if we've ever interacted with the term doom scrolling, where you see young people just constantly scrolling and they look like zombies, that's precisely what it is that as soon as they hit a new post on their iPhone or whatever, their brain lights up with the reward neurotransmitter. Their brain gets happy. It releases feel-good chemicals. But soon afterwards, the entire post becomes boring. And so they scroll to get another hit. So they're literally looking at it like a drug. However, this is the biggest caveat, and something not a lot of people want to talk about, is that as they continue scrolling, they're not doing it to feel good. They're doing it to stop feeling bad. That is how the dopamine has wrapped around their brain. So this is pretty sinister if you're 30, 35, 50, 80. But if you're 10, this is not just an action that you're undertaking. This is your brain morphing around this type of behavior. You were talking about your son knew how to operate a smartphone when he was 3. Well, God forbid, but what if an entire generation learns how to be addicted to the smartphone when they're 10? And that's just the first part. That's the reward part. Reputation goes a step further. We're all, it goes back to evolutionary psychology. We all exist in hierarchies. We all need information to know exactly where we exist within the hierarchy. And so social media preys on that with things like likes, comments, followers, subscribers, shares. All of these digital social metrics have to do with giving us information on where we are, where we exist within that hierarchy. And as we get more followers and likes and shares and whatever, our dopamine increases. So we've all felt the surge when we get 100 new followers or something, or we get a ton of likes or a ton of shares on a certain piece of content. We all feel great. Well, why do we feel great? That feels pretty arbitrary. It's because we've been trained to feel great, because those are hits of social status. Now, the reach portion is also very interesting, because this couldn't necessarily happen if we had to go to the library and drive 20 minutes every time we wanted to use Facebook, for example. But instead, we got an iPhone, or we got an iPad or a laptop or something, and now we can use it 24/7 whenever we want, for as long as we want. I could go on Facebook for the next 30 days straight and nobody would stop me. Just to seal that point in 2017, Reed Hastings, the former CEO of Netflix, now the chairman of the board, or the chairman of Netflix, he was at one of his board calls, and he said, this is 2017, he said, our biggest competitor for Netflix, our biggest competitor at the margin isn't Disney Plus, it's not Amazon Prime, it's not even YouTube. The biggest competitor for Netflix at the margins is sleep. So people can search that up. That's verbatim. So when companies and businesses and big tech are operating with this mindset of, we don't really care about you, the human, all we care about is our bottom line, and we're going to sacrifice your biological necessity for our profitability, that presents a really sinister and really terrifying outlook on an entire generation, on an entire species. So let's get to Gen Alpha, the generation coming up in the AI generated age. So we already have Gen Z who have suffered from all of these things, who've grown up in what I call immature digital technology. Social media and everything were not as perverse between 2013 to 2017. They were absolutely sinister, but not as perverse as they are now. So between, let's say, 2018 and 2020, certain things changed. So Instagram, let's say, and this is taken from Tristan Harris, Instagram started competing with TikTok and Snapchat and all of these things. And people are not really aware of this, but there are these things called beautification filters on Instagram. You know, you've seen the girls and the guys take out their phone and they go on Snapchat or whatever, and now they look like a dog or a cat or something like that. There's rainbows coming out of their mouth. So that's a filter. So every time you use a filter, not every time, but whenever you open the filter changes the way that your face looks, even if there's nothing coming out. Like even if there's no dog, your face can still look differently. Let's call that a beautification filter because it makes you more beautiful. And let's say it alters your face to be more beautiful by 3%. Then you go from Snapchat and you go back to Instagram, but there's no beautification filter, so you look less beautiful, and so there's no incentive for you to stay on Instagram. I would rather go back and take pictures on Snapchat because I look more pretty. So there's an incentive now for companies, or there was an incentive, now there's absolutely incentive, but there's an incentive for those companies, Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram, to start amping up that beautification filter percentage to get you back to the platform. So if Snapchat is 3%, I go to Instagram, now it's 5%. I look just a tiny bit better. But now TikTok doesn't do 5%, TikTok does 8%. So I go to TikTok and I start taking pictures and videos. But now Snapchat has to compete, so Snapchat ramps it up to 12%. And so you just have this race to the top of how much can we morph people. You have these things called what I call virality identities. So in 2020, we saw basically everybody and their mother use TikTok. And when you're using TikTok, your claim to fame, your proximity to fame was so low. So you could upload a video and be immediately, cast to TikTok fame, which just feels like an oxymoron, within hours to days, right? So people went on TikTok and started posting, and some people got famous, some people didn't because they were sold a bag of worms. But what ended up happening was that those people that got famous, one thing content creators know is audience capture. So when people went to TikTok and one of their videos blew up, now they have to start making more content to replicate that viral video, number one. But number two is that they start looking at that person in the viral video as the better person relative to them. Because it wasn't normal me that's not constantly doing the TikTok dances that got the billion views. It's the girl or the guy in that TikTok video that got the billion views. So they start morphing their identity towards what made them famous, to the point where people, it's literally called Snapchat dysmorphia. I encourage people to look it up if they, not before bed, but it's called Snapchat dysmorphia, where people will go under the knife, particularly women will go under the knife and get surgery to look more like the Snapchat filters. We talked about the beautification filters before. So that's mature technology. That's how mature technology is morphing people's psychological and psychology and behavior.
Well, man, usually on this show, we have a lot of bantering back and forth, but everything you just talked about was so right on the money, so well connected that I just let you run with it, man. I'll let you riff away. And it was all very fascinating to listen to. A lot of what you talked about is not going to be new to this audience, just up front. But the way you presented it was so full and complete that I think it is extremely valuable. Nobody here is going to pretend that this doom scrolling or the concept of, say, young people getting together at Denny's and having breakfast, but nobody's talking to each other, they're all on their devices. Nobody's pretending any of that's new. All of that is almost 20 years old now. I think what is a new concept to many is that over the years, we as humans, as hopeful and optimistic a lot such as we are, have bought into the promise of technology, when in reality, there's always been a sinister side of it that we weren't really clued into, perhaps on purpose. I think everybody sort of knew that as soon as television was introduced, a lot of people would live vicariously through it. But it was such an awesome, fun technology to bring about that people gladly got glued to their television sets. So when smartphones happened, and if you've ever seen the movie about BlackBerry, it's a wonderful movie, and pretty much the major plot twist And it is when the smartphone comes out, when the iPhone comes out. That's when everybody at BlackBerry kind of looks at themselves in the movie, and I mean in real life too, and says, well, we're screwed. The fun's over. I remember the first commercial I ever saw for an iPhone. I was sitting next to my wife and I said, wow, the future just got here, and you're talking about apps and you're talking about just being able to swipe right and swipe left. It seems so cool and everybody wanted one, but nobody brought up the elephant in the room, which is you're going to become addicted to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you move forward and more technology comes at us. COVID happens and, man, I am so sorry you missed out on actual real socialization during college. That has got to be, it's just a crime. Okay. But during COVID, by the time that happened, we were already so armpit deep in technology with our noses in our devices that a lot of people felt it was a welcome diversion for however long it was going to be from having to deal with real people in the real world. And so the isolation grew because people were replacing real, actual human interaction with this ersatz version of socialization that was really all about putting oneself first and getting that dopamine rush. And then on top of all else, one thing I didn't hear you mention is that when we were all made subject to corporate or even societally driven social media, as opposed to really getting out there and talking with real human beings privately amongst ourselves, an agenda came across that we weren't necessarily expecting or ready for. And a lot of us were trusting enough to believe it. So even in the context of COVID, looking back 3 to 5 years now, we were all lied to. And there are a lot of people who don't want to admit it.
Mm-hmm.
But media could drive whatever narrative they want. They could shut down whatever narrative they want. And people were either led to believe it or they were led to kind of become a little bit skeptical, if not flat out iconoclastic towards it. But the people who ever raised a ruckus about what we were being told during COVID were ostracized and shut off and canceled and banned from social media. So their voices were basically blotted out of the picture. Now, that's all not very democratic. Now that we're all back out being social again, we've developed all these habits of being adversarial and keeping people at arm's length, and we'd rather not really have conversations. And now, to segue to the point of your book, which is what I know you want to get to, we don't even have to, because a computer will generate everything we're supposed to believe, and we don't have to know anything anymore because a large language model will generate everything we should believe and all the knowledge we should have. And voila, it's the year 2025, and you can't even get a job being a garbage collector unless you're an expert in AI.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next? Where's this all going? The promise of AI, I think, is perfectly clear. Are you going to go so far as to believe that the singularity is coming, or do you have a different angle on why AI itself is going to be sinister? Have at it.
Yeah. I have never subscribed to the fact or to the line of thinking that this will go to the singularity. I think Eric J. Larson wrote an incredible book called The Myth of Artificial Intelligence, which goes over exactly that. But your audience can look at people like Gary Marcus, for example. He has a great Substack to talk about, why this proposed pathway to AGI that's been indoctrinated from Sam Altman and his cronies is rather, how would you say respectfully, rather not on the money. If somebody tells you that AGI is coming from an LLM, you have to look at them like they are fucking insane.
What's AGI?
AGI is artificial general intelligence.
Okay.
So when people are worried about the Terminator stuff, I'm not trying to be condescending and say that I don't understand that worry. I totally understand that worry and I feel for those people. But when people in Silicon Valley and stuff are saying that we should be worried about artificial general intelligence and we should prepare for the AGI apocalypse, I think those people have perverse incentives or trying to do something else rather than what they're saying. So I wouldn't worry about artificial general intelligence from ChatGPT anytime soon or at all.
My counter to your argument would be,
Please.
A, I think it's already happening. And B, I think we as a stupid human race, and not necessarily just Gen Z, but as a human race, are welcoming it. We're rolling out the red carpet for it. As we speak, ChatGPT has already rolled out what it calls God mode, and yes, you can pray to ChatGPT. That is horrifying. ChatGPT has already replaced thought leaders because you can ask ChatGPT to aggregate the thoughts of anybody you want or any number of people you want and speak in any person's voice you want it to speak in. Now, of course, it's still a prediction mechanism. It's still just an information aggregation device, right? It's still a transformer, so it's not going to be perfect. It's still going to hallucinate, but it's also as stupid as it's ever going to be. And not to be overlooked, ChatGPT in particular, with all its popularity, has a very hard time being mean or nasty at all to people, even when they need it. It is Mr. Nice Guy to the core. So by design, it gives people what their itching ears want to hear, which is tantalizing to human nature. So then, the admittedly well-founded assumption is that replacing, say, your therapist or even your PC technician with ChatGPT carries little inherent risk. Why? Because first of all, the information is probably going to be more accurate than you're going to get from any single human being out there, right? But also, and more importantly, like I just said, it's not going to be mean to you. There's no risk inherent within most human interaction that this person's going to say the wrong thing or they're going to show displeasure towards you or insult you or anything like that. It's really kind of nice in the truest sense of the word. So what's going on is human beings are already pledging allegiance to AI because it's fun and it's cool. And I think in many ways this, despite some loud voices out there who are declaring the warnings of how sinister this could be. Now, the Pollyannas amongst us will say, oh, someone really smart will just go unplug this computer when it gets to be, hurtling headlong towards the singularity. But I'm not so sure that would happen, Ayush, because I think we love this. I think we think it's great, and we somehow block out the fact that a cold, impersonal, soulless machine would be a strict mistress if it ever came to that. You know what I mean?
I would agree with you that we don't necessarily need artificial general intelligence in order for us to bow down to the machine. I mean, that was happening way before ChatGPT or anything like the transformer technology came onto the market. I mean,
true. That's actually true.
We've all as content creators been bowing down to the algorithm since God knows when. It's just a different type of bowing down, doing SEO and stuff is all bowing down to the algorithm. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying,
It's not as blatant.
Exactly. So when we're talking about very explicit instances of bowing down to artificial intelligence, you can look at Replica, for example, which is a chatbot designed to replicate a partner, basically. And 40% of its users are already in committed relationships. They're either married or have a committed partner. What does that do? It brings up the conversation of like, is that cheating? Well, okay, if that is or isn't cheating, is using digital pornography cheating? Is OnlyFans cheating? All these interesting questions come up. Where is this going? So we can do it two directions. We can go, where is this going for all of society, or where is this going for Generation Alpha, who are already suffering from, the critical thinking skills and attention deficits?
Well, let me throw something on the table that may help guide this conversation. If you look at the work of the late Dr. Philip Zimbardo and others who've studied the dynamics of men and masculinity relative to technology for years and years now, there's been a pattern. And, the elephant in the room here is, indeed, this is nothing new. It's just now more obviously a problem than ever. It was made such with smartphones for sure. One could argue it was made such with broadband for sure. Or even the internet. Depends on how far you want to go back, right? But AI represents another milestone in just how sinister this could potentially be. So let's start with that point. But guys like Zimbardo would say, this young generation of men, and by young generation, I know guys 70 who are affected by this, okay? So, sure. I think we're talking about a gradual societal trend. But, when we're talking about the neuroplasticity of young people out there and I guess the ubiquity of this movement en masse as an entire generation towards being buried by technology or buried in technology. What Zimbrano would say is we have a generation of boys in particular, and we have an audience of all men, so this is going to be very poignant, We have a generation of men who have fought a bunch of wars using video games and banged a bunch of chicks on porn, but they're not in the real world ready to battle anything or make love to anyone because it's all been virtual, electronic. So you have a bunch of pussies out there who fought vicarious wars on a video screen, and you have a bunch of guys who have absolutely no clue what to do with a real woman, who have had countless internet whores and now presumably have AI girlfriends to do their bidding. And if that doesn't occur to every guy listening to this is utterly sinister without anything other than purely superficial benefit, I don't know what would. What say you?
I would not push back, but I would rephrase what you're saying about fighting wars. I mean, I know where you're going with that, but I would say they just watched somebody fight the wars and they just watched somebody else bang the chick in front of them. So they're just training themselves in voyeurism in that way. So we have some research on what happens to men in this way. So 88% of scenes in the top-rated pornography portray anger and violence towards men, or from men towards women. And another study conducted found that men that consumed this violent pornography were 6 times more likely to commit sexual violence later in life. This is a pretty scary circumstance because as more influencers come out, and we'll talk about the AI influencers, but as more influencers come out and saying wilder and wilder things, men have this, I guess you can call it a predisposition now to commit that violence. And then we get to the influencers of, you can literally create, so number one, when I'm talking about I hate influencers in that way, I may not need to hate them for long because there is an AI generated Instagram model out of Spain named Aitana Lopez, I believe, who nets their parent company around I think the number I remember is $11,000 or $12,000 a month, and she's a fake. She doesn't exist. But that company was tired of paying real influencers to do their bidding and to pose for the products, so they just created an AI generated influencer. Another one is Lil Michaela. I encourage people to search them up if they're interested. But when it comes to these untested waters for where young men at, now you could have not just an Andrew Tate persona. I'm not sure how this audience feels about Andrew Tate, but you could have an even wilder cat saying even wilder things who doesn't exist. But you could have the same type of persona and you could have him meet basically everybody and cost nothing to generate and say whatever he or she wants and kind of shock the generation, whichever generation it is, into believing whatever they want. And so you're getting to a point where using platforms like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and X, I have so many instances where I'm watching a video and I'm 30, 45 seconds in, and I'm like, wait, this is generated by artificial intelligence. This person isn't real. Their voice isn't real. What they're talking about is probably BS. And if you're existing in that mode, if you're doom scrolling at night and you have no direction in life and you're just consuming without worry, without being able to critically think about something, which is something that is increasingly being lost, not just in Gen Alpha, but in people using artificial intelligence, you're way more susceptible to being propagandized and have your mind morphed around basically anything that people with artificial intelligence and a couple bucks in the bank want you to believe. That to me is way worse than AGI. Skynet pales in comparison to what this thing is, because number one, Skynet is fiction. This is real. Skynet is far in the future when AGI comes into existence. This is happening now, and it's happening more and more as the days go by.
Well, AI is no longer interesting or novel. It's a part of our life, and it has become such at breakneck speed, breathtakingly quickly. I'm going to go ahead and layer onto what you said, that if it's really about men being, I guess, desensitized into thinking that violent porn is normative, therefore, if we get a real woman in front of us, she wants to be abused, etc., then you can't discount the argument that violent video games are making men more violent. here's where I'm going to throw a wrench in that machine. And I don't know how you feel about this. But the more they dig into why, some young punk kid goes and shoots up Parkland High School, the more they realize it wasn't because he had access to guns, although that particular shooter did, of course, or that he's been watching too much porn or playing too many video games or listening to too much hip hop. It's that he felt isolated and bullied and rejected and powerless, and he wanted to go get those mofos. So what ends up happening is during COVID, for example, or all the years leading up to it where we were led away from real social interaction and towards burying our noses in our devices, as we've talked about in this show at length, it wasn't so much the content, it was the state of human being where you were isolated and alone that created the bitterness and the violence. Now, you have peer-reviewed studies to support that also. So is this kind of a sine wave effect where on one hand, we're being isolated socially to the point of being really frustrated and, bottled up. And second of all, we're being fed all this BS about what the world looks like on our television screen or on our computer screen or on our iPhone compared to what we would hope it would look like in real life. That's just not happening for us. It's kind of an exponential effect,
Absolutely. I don't want to agree with you, but I do, because you're saying a lot of things that not just make sense, but line up with my own thinking. I've never really subscribed to this theory because it's not been proven, but this theory that, violent video games make young men more violent. I don't see how that's the case because I've never played Call of Duty and said, I want to do this in real life.
Yeah, but I don't think most of us as men watch porn and go, I want to go abuse a chick either.
Exactly.
Most of us just want to masturbate. But there are going to be these outliers, and hopefully there's not many of them. But this is kind of a cynical podcast episode. But there are potentially thousands of guys out there who are going to be fed this in a crucible of isolation and go out and act on it. At least let's put it this way. If it's going to be true for porn, ergo, it's going to have to be true for the video games and music and whatever else influences us.
I don't know if I agree with that, just because with Call of Duty, I'm just using Call of Duty as one of the video games, but with Call of Duty, I've never expressed intimate desire for that circumstance. But with porn, we all want to be the guy in the video. We all are looking as we're all using it as a kind of learning opportunity, especially if you're a young person who has this is one of the points that I make, is that people are using porn as the bedrock for their sexual education. Before, your parents would talk to you about sex, use a condom, make sure you don't have sex with the wrong person, make sure that you guys are safe, practice abstinence, practice consent, all of these things. People are just going to porn and looking at a random video and seeing the interactions of hey, I can just go up to a girl and she's going to look at me and then she's going to look down and start stroking me. And then we're going to go back to my hotel room, which I magically have, and we're going to get on this freak show. That to me, if I'm a 10-year-old, I can understand consuming pornography for years on end and then being in a highly sexualized circumstance, like at a bar, at a club, or at a party, and interacting with a woman and completely missing the signals because I've been kind of indoctrinated with this false behavior. When people say I watch porn for the plot, they're saying it tongue in cheek and they're joking about it, obviously. But there is kind of that similarity with movies where we all want to be, the Ryan Gosling and Crazy Stupid Love or whatever. We want to be the George Clooney. We want to be
at least for the first half of the movie, we want to be.
Exactly. We want to be those male archetypes that resemble that are cool and they're fashionable and they're getting the women. And so I think the same thing applies in pornography, unfortunately. But you're absolutely right in the sense of not every man is going to use pornography as a learning thing and immediately do fish hooks in the bedroom. That doesn't make any sense.
All right, well, let me go ahead and throw on the table here that I'm indeed playing devil's advocate with a lot of what I'm bringing up here. I don't have a well-formed opinion based on peer-reviewed studies or psychoanalysis or anything else that either porn and or video games and or hip-hop is really causing men to be destructive and violent. I'll leave that up to the feminists. But what I do know about porn, insofar as I'm going to agree with you on this particular point in reality, is that when men look at what's going on in porn and they see some other bastard banging all these beautiful chicks, it's not so much that they get into a real world situation with a woman and fumble it vis-a-vis what they saw in porn. It's more like they're getting really super frustrated and angry because they're not even getting access to those situations at all in the real world.
100%.
All the women are rejecting me. They all think I'm a loser. I'm an incel, therefore I'm violent. And then what do the feminists do? They blame the incels for being incels, which exacerbates the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have AI that comes along and says, oh, you poor baby, I'll be your AI influencer, your AI girlfriend, and I'll give you whatever you want. So now we're taking people who are already angry and bitter and we're appeasing them with whatever they want, which sounds a lot to me like paying ransom to terrorists. It's not going to foment anything positive. They're not going to feel better about it once they've been appeased. They're going to want more of it. And that could be where we're taking perfectly good men, at least potentially out there, and corrupting them in the way you're talking about. And to me, that's horrifying.
I agree with this. And the thing that will be interesting to me is if violence from young men goes down with the rise of applications like Replica because their emotional needs are met, or violence
They're
goes
just locked
up.
in their bedroom with their thoughts and their emotions.
Exactly.
Right.
Like if you're able to use artificial intelligence to manage your emotions, I don't even believe in that statement because I don't think you can use AI to manage your emotions, but let's put that aside.
Well, there's
I
a
think
lot of
that
people out there trying.
they're trying, but I don't think that the technology of ChatGPT being very sycophantic is conducive to managing your emotions. I would definitely want to go to a specialized psychotherapist for that. However, I would eat my words if there was a way to input the expert knowledge of a psychotherapist into a ChatGPT-like system without the sycophancy and without the hallucination. I think that could be very powerful. I would absolutely.
The other thing
go
that goes
for
on top of this is when you have people who are so dependent on technology for their social needs, which is a whole lot of people nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
Oddly and perhaps ironically, Ayush, it's a bit of a stretch for them to think that they're actually going to open the door, walk outside, and do anything negative towards any other people, because, by God, that would involve being social again. I know. What a strange irony, right?
Oh, it's absolutely strange. A lot of the things about this modern day is strange. It's very paradoxical. It's very ironic. Like where the Dunbar number is, as you guys probably know, is 250 to 2,000 people, and yet the average American has between 1 to 4 close friends, if that. Right. So in the age of connection and the age of being able to reach out to 8 billion people, I am not even able to reach out to 1 to 4 properly. Right.
Yeah. The bigger a city you're in, the more lonely you are.
Right. And I don't know what to do with precisely that, this age of disconnection, this age of we don't know what's going on. There's too much noise. There's too much distraction. There's too much on Netflix. I'm never going to get to the bottom of Netflix or TikTok or Instagram or YouTube or Google. I can talk to ChatGPT for hours on end. I can create a Hinge or Tinder or Bumble or OkCupid or Plenty of Fish or whatever profile and continue swiping and not get anywhere. But I think the question that we're missing is what does it mean to be human in the 21st century? And I don't think we're talking about that enough. And I would love to explore that if we have time, obviously. But that's where I want to go with all this work that I'm doing is, hey, can we talk about what it means to be human? And then can we build to that future? That's why I get very cynical coming full circle with my generation. It's because you guys, when people, if we last for another 1,000 years, but when people look back on the internet and on digital technology and they say, what was the first generation like that consumed digital technology from the jump, that were born with digital tech? It's Gen Z. We're living that right now. We have that generation here. And we're not doing anything with it. We're just being consumed by it, as you're talking about. And to me, as a Gen Z, you have to stop putting so much emphasis on digital tech and start realizing, hey, this can be a tool to aid my humanity, but I can't use my humanity to aid the tool. It can work in one way. It shouldn't work in the other.
Well, absolutely. So what does it mean to be human in the 21st century? My guess is you're going to say something to the effect of, it means what it always has. We just have to get back to it. Am I onto something?
I would say, well, I don't know what it always has meant, and I always want to be fully transparent on what I don't know. So I don't know where you're going with what it always has meant. I would love to know what you are going to say on that front. But
well, I'll
to
give
me,
you like one sentence and then I'll let
please.
you riff on the rest.
Please.
Well, you mentioned Dunbar's number, which is a theoretical sociological limit to how many social interactions at, somewhat of a deep level, perhaps more than a superficial level, that humans can actually handle cognitively, right? I think for millennia, before there was really a whole lot of technology, basically think like an Amish person for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity has always been very social and very collaborative, very provincial. And we had the people we loved and we trusted, and we had the people we didn't love and didn't trust, and they were the enemies. And together we were trying to move forward, make life better for each other, protect and provide for our loved ones and for our young ones if we're a man, and nurture and educate and bring love and joy if you're a woman. And we've all just tried to live our best lives together, whatever that meant, even though we lived in a flawed universe. When the industrial age hit, you could go back to the printing press probably. Certainly in Rome, there were better ways to live your best life than there were in the Dark Ages in Europe, for sure. There's been some ebb and flow throughout humanity's history. But nobody can argue that probably somewhere early in the 20th century, things started escalating at an out-of-control pace. Someone from 1650, for example, would probably recognize most of what's going on in the year 1750. I don't think anybody in 1875 would understand what 1975 looks like. And I think most people in 1920 would be flabbergasted by the year 2020. And I don't know about you, Ayush, but I have no idea. I can't even begin to guess what the year 2125 is going to look like. That's what I'm talking about. That was more than one sentence, and I apologize. You have the mic, you have the floor from here.
Well, I do want to just throw it back to you just for a second. So when you're talking about what it means to be human, are you talking about, let's get back to the old ways of connection, family, socialization, but just use technology as an augment? Or are you talking about something else?
Well, yeah, I guess to be clear there, I'm not sure the forward motion of technology really had a damning effect on our ability to connect until really broadband internet. It was all pretty much helpful until then. At least it wasn't so eminently, balefully threatening to it. We all gathered at the movie theater. We all got in our car to visit other people. We all got in a train and went to visit a place we never visited before and got wise to someone else and their way of life. We got on airplanes and we could now go see Europe without being in a boat for 5 months or something like that. So nowadays, the technology at some point has morphed into drawing us away from our natural instincts as humans to be collaborative and social. I think the collaboration, the being together as humans is absolutely the kernel of our human being. And I think that's what's being stolen from us or coaxed away from us.
It's being stolen, but the irony, which seems like one of the themes of this episode, is that if we continue forth on this direction of AI and begin to automate everything as people are worried about, and it's true, that's one of the main reasons why I wrote the book, is to tell my generation to fix the fuck up because they're going to be automated out of existence. And that's increasingly happening as we speak.
Already.
Oh, yeah. A startup CEO in India, he replaced 23 people with a chatbot, basically cut his workforce down by 90%. People, in 2025, businesses say, let me just bring up the statistic, but it's something like 80% of businesses say that they're not going to hire as many people because they're going to adopt AI automation. And now with agents and stuff, it's like Gen Z being the digital natives, they have no foot. They have no leg to stand on when it comes to being a digital native. Who gives a shit if you're a digital native? We have an AI to take care of it.
All right, Ayush, what does it mean to be human, man?
I got you. So the irony is that as we move forward with artificial intelligence and we automate everything, we'll be forced to ask that question because all we'll have left is the creativity, is the connection, is creating families, is engaging in social projects. And to me, that is what I want to get back to, is focusing on health and longevity, is focusing on what kind of societies can we build that don't take advantage of my biology and my psychology. I can explain what I mean by that, but work for me.
Well, it means to work for you instead of against you.
Exactly. So for example, what if we decentralized Uber and put it on a blockchain so it became a Commonwealth resource, and every time I go to, the creative studio, I had an incentive to be more creative because we built an economy where my creativity lends favor to your creativity, right? So there are so many interesting things we can do with technology. What if we could put a Wikipedia-like thing, instead of having it as a centralized resource that's become so political? This is from Daniel Schmachtenberger, by the way. But what if we could use crypto consensus mechanisms in order to, decentralize those information circuits and incentivize people to keep the system tamper-free and bad actor-free? There's so many different things that we can do with tech that can aid us in our ability to be human. And we can also have different definitions and update the definition of what it means to be human. Homo sapiens mean wise men right now. It can mean something else, 50 or 100 years down the line, even 25 years down the line. I don't think we have to wait until 21, 25 in order to see a different world. We could create it with focused direction, but I don't think we're going to get there if we don't, if we don't talk enough about the future we want, we won't build the future we need.
Well, to kind of wrap this all up with a little bow in the interest of time.
Sure.
My hope and my naive belief is that we're going to get to a point very soon with AI, not dissimilar to the point we got with the idea of human cloning. I mean, we can do it, but we'd better not. And there's going to come a point where this is going to be something we start serving instead of vice versa. And yet the cynic in me is starting to believe that, well, nobody slammed the brakes on smartphones or on social media, so why stop there? This has been a very fascinating conversation, and we could go on and on. I mean, the first thing I thought of when you were talking about what the future might look like is someone's going to come around and go, well, that sounds like a bunch of communists to me. And
sure. I accept
and
that.
It kind of does.
I accept that. I can push back, but I know where you're going.
Yeah. I mean, it would just be another conversation for another day. Are we all headed towards being a bunch of communists and liking it? I mean, it'd be a great show. Maybe you should come back and we talk about just that. Maybe that's your next book.
Let's do it.
Yeah, man. But as interesting and perhaps no fun as this conversation's been, I'm actually holding a prurient sense of satisfaction having had it. And I hope you do too. And I think with so many guys out there who are intelligent and thinking about this has definitely been one of those episodes that's food for thought. So I really appreciate you. And I want to send guys, first of all, to Amazon where they can get your book. It's called AI for Generation Z. And you can find it at the top of the Amazon influencer queue at mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon, guys, especially if you're listening to this episode within a few days of it being released. Also, when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Ayush, AYUSH, you will go to Ayush Prakash's website. And what are they going to find there?
They can find links to my socials, to the podcast if they're interested. I encourage people to email me if they have further questions. I'm always checking my email. That's my vice. But yeah, you can just find more of the work I'm doing. You can get exclusive access to the crypto book I'm writing and much more.
Fantastic. So once again, thank you so much, Ayush, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. I hope and pray there are more guys like you out there in Gen Z who are going to make this world a better place someday, if not right now. Thank you so much for being here.
Scott, thank you so much for having me. We'll talk very soon.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have you back. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com recently, you got to go there and download all the free goodies. I have a book for you called Sticking Point Solved. You can check out all the show notes, see what all our guests look like, and get on the phone and talk to me for 25 to 30 minutes. It won't be AI. It'll really be me. You can have a real conversation with a real dude about where you are in your world your real world, I might add, with real women out there, or lack thereof. Talk to me free for 25 minutes. Get on my calendar at mountaintoppodcast.com, where you'll find that opportunity and so much more. Also, I want to remind you to keep supporting our sponsors, Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, the Keyport, and Hero Soap. All three of those companies are going to man you up. They're going to level up your masculinity, and all of them are coming out with new and cool items all the time that you just got to check out. All of that and more is there for you when you visit mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.